call this to order, or move to call the meeting to order.
Let's begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, August 20th, 2014. Please remember to turn off your cell phones and to take any extraneous conversations out in the hall. We are making both an audio and a visual recording of this meeting, and any other recordings that you would choose to make, you're required to let us know. Okay, so we'll go to the public meeting, public comment. Anything from the public on matters that aren't before us tonight? Okay, seeing not. Public hearing notices of intent. Okay, the SPPF project on Baxter Road, the revetment project, has been continued to November 12th. And the land bank at 17 and 19 North Liberty and 8 Wesco Place is continued to September 17th. Lily Pond Realty Trust at 27, 29, 31, and 15, or 31 North Liberty and 15 East Tristram have all been continued to September 3rd. Cumberland Farms at 115 Orange Street is continued to September 3rd, as is Sanford at 16, 22, and 26 Easton Street.
It's going to be a happy meeting.
Which leaves us with just a couple of items tonight. The first one is TAC 3 at 26 Washington Street.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo and Arthur Reed. This is the second public hearing for this application, which involves the redevelopment of an existing parcel down on Washington Street, fronting on Nantucket Harbor. I have another plan here if you
I want it here somewhere.
I have it right here if you'd like. It's the same one that's revised as of August 14th. Oh, okay. And
The complicated one, I think it might be.
I would like to just take a few minutes. We have, since the first hearing, submitted a revised plan and a letter along with some architectural drawings. So I'd like to just take a few minutes to run through the supplemental information which was provided in response to comments that we received at the first hearing. First, there had been a question about a resource area on the opposite side of the road. So you can see here that we've added 3 wetland flags for that's the other side of a paved road, for that there is a vegetated wetland on the other side. So we've added that to the plan. A very small portion of the proposed garage structure does fall within the 50 of that other wetland, but again, it's on the, as I said, on the other side of a paved road and located within what's currently existing brick area. We've already asked for a waiver for the project in its entirety with respect to structural area within 50 feet, and I'll get back to that in a minute. The other piece, as I said, which should be in your packets, and we have, is we've included the updated architectural drawings. The team has also been going through the HDC process at the same time as the Concom process, and so there were some slight modifications which are now reflected both on the architectural plans that have been provided to you as well as on the plans that are before you. There was a question with respect to the structural area that existed within the buffer zones, and so you can see that we've added a table to the plan itself, and we have the table shows existing and proposed structural area broken down by the 0 to 25 and the 25 to 50 foot buffer zones. So we have a net decrease of structural area within the 25 foot buffer zone of 180 square feet, and a net increase within the further away buffer zone of the 25 to 50 of 175. I believe that represents a twofold net benefit. One, while there is a reduction and it is small, it is less, but more to the point that we're reducing the area that's within the 0 to 25 from where it currently exists now, as well as moving further away from the resource area, which we would consider to be of greater benefit to the resource area protection. There was also a question that had been raised about the type of foundation that we've used, so I've documented for your files in the letter that it would be vertical piers. And again, the project is very much part of bringing this structure into compliance with the new FEMA flood zone elevation that came into effect on June 14th for the area, as well as current Mass State Building Code and all the related amendments that have to do with construction within the flood zone. Finally, there had been a question about the parking area and showing the new driveway entrance, which hadn't been shown. So we now have shown the revised driveway entrance and the parking area and the way that that will work. And then, I guess that wasn't finally. There was also a suggestion or a comment that the silt fencing be shown. So we've added proposed silt fence along the easterly side of the project. And then there was a question with respect to the chance of stormwater runoff going down the walking path. And what I've done is to add spot elevations that show that there is actually a ridge in the middle of the path. We go from 5 up to 5.6 and then down to 4.5. And I confirmed that by going out and having a look. So there's not going to be stormwater that runs off the site down towards the harbor. As well, the dune area and the buffer zone in that area is all very well vegetated. And again, our path is just going to consist of simply a cut traditional sand path to the beach, if you will. And with that, I believe we've covered all of the comments that were received at the first hearing, and be happy to try to address any concerns or additional questions that you may have.
Art, with that path, since it's just a sand path and it's going to wear, can that be sort of maintained as a elevated?
Sure.
So it doesn't, just
I
get a
think
trench
that
in there.
there's two ways that we could go about that. We're not proposing any grade change, but certainly there could be an additional condition that something to the effect that a ridge shall be maintained in the walking path. If that was amenable to the commission.
Add sand or something that starts.
Or to maintain the existing elevation so that if it wears and if there was ever to be a concern or notice it, that would be required then to add some additional sand there to maintain existing grades in the area.
I know most of the existing path is off-site, but will your clients now cease using that path
Just
so it
cease
can
using
be
it.
allowed to heal, or is
Right, we're just going to
anybody
let it
else?
grow in. Just let it be.
Okay,
It's on
Which
the
I
middle
don't think will
parcel.
take very
it's
long.
next door. Yeah,
Right.
Those
yeah.
things
it'll
tend to fill in
probably
pretty
fill
fast.
right
And
in, yeah.
the other property has its own path over here.
Okay.
Yes, that was permitted as part of the Harborview Place project.
It's cut through the Rosa Rugosa, right?
That's correct.
Right.
Rosa rugosa, which meets all the criteria as an invasive species, but is not recognized as such.
Yeah.
You got to say that whole sentence with those, I guess, yeah.
It is embraced, but if you embrace it too closely, it may be somewhat.
The point really, the larger point, I don't know, for those who haven't been here, is that this commission has taken a sort of a political position rather than one based on fact and science.
Limited.
So Art, on a similarly,
We're not
Correct.
proposing to plant
Same
further
political
rugosa.
position from the commission.
yeah.
I know, and we've actually denied the planting of that in other locations.
So did you have somebody check this tree? I see it's labeled
Yeah,
as
so
sycamore now.
that's the other thing that did change on the plan, is we did have someone check the tree and identify both the one to be removed and the one that's to be maintained. And so I changed the labels. I got more information than I ever thought I would regarding the trees, and explaining the difference to me that while the word sycamore is included in both of the labels of the tree, they're quite different. One being American sycamore and the other being a sycamore maple tree. So
And the
So I
sycamore
update-
maples on the invasive list for the state.
and that's the one we're proposing to remove.
It's on the invasive list, but actually doesn't function invasively in Nantucket.
You're right, now you're right about
Yeah,
that.
you're right. I mean, you do see them in
Moving along.
waste places, but
Nice picture.
anyway, thanks.
Well, we do have more work, we can move along, but we do have more work to do if we're going to truly go by fact on these things and truly go by objective criteria. There is work that has to be done there. And I will continue to make that point as these things come along, regardless of whether people are sympathetic to it.
Any other questions for Art? Anything from the public? Okay, Arthur, you have anything to add, or are you just here for?
No, I'm just here to about clean up if anybody has anything for me, but I'm fine for now.
Okay, Jeff, do we have everything we need to close the hearing?
Yes, sir.
Art, you ready to close?
Yes, sir.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Move to close?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know the invasive plant species committee is happy to come back and give a new presentation to the two
And
new
if you
members.
forget.
So they can see all of the state and local.
Mr. Chairman, are we discussing? I couldn't
Let's
hear.
go on.
I was saying that Kelly and the Invasive Plant Species Committee are happy to come back, if we'd like them to, and present the information that went into the adoption of our invasive plant list and the state list to the two new.
Zarella?
We're going to have that invasive species discussion. We should make a separate
Separate
agenda item
agenda.
at some point to discuss that very issue, as opposed to doing it in between.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I just so you can see where it came from. Yeah, we'll ask to.
Or if anyone has questions about the current condition of that or regulations, you can come see me, and I'll be happy to discuss it.
There you go.
okay, let's move on here.
Thank you. For the record, Paul Santos, representing the applicant Ron and Linda Zarella for a notice of intent filed for the property at 129 Wawinet Road. The property is located on the east side of Wawinet Road, north of the Wawinet house, if you will. It is a small two-bedroom cottage that the structure predates both zoning and the Wetland Protection Act in 1972. The site itself contains a number of regulated or resource areas. It is located within a mapped flood hazard zone. It is located within the mapped Barrier Beach Inventory Project. The proposed site is located within a priority habitat and estimated habitat of the National Endangered Species Program. And the site is also contains a coastal dune. The property itself is served by water from the Wawinet well, so there is no private well on the site itself, but it is serviced by the water line which emanates from the Wawinet well, as do most of the properties down in this area. Wawinet Road is a dirt track, or dirt road, if you will, which runs in a north-south direction. The entire site, as I said, is a barrier beach. The NHESP mapping is shown on the plan here, demarcated with this line here. And then the actual dune itself is flagged with flags 1 through 9, which essentially runs along the backside of the developed area, along the backside of the existing structure. As I said, it's a smaller two-bedroom cottage surrounded by decking and boardwalks, and it does have a residential shell driveway on the property. It does have a septic system, distribution box, and a single 2-foot by 40-foot leaching trench which runs along the property along Wawinet Road. There are pictures in the application, but I'll just kind of briefly walk you through here. This is the front of the existing structure. This is a view to the north, which is along this section of the structure, which there's an elevated stairway to the half-story on the structure itself. The back of the structure, essentially standing on the coastal dune, which is that elevated coastal dune here looking to the back side of the structure. And then the side of the structure to the south, which is basically a deck at grade or boardwalk that wraps around the existing structure. This is a photo, actually a historical photo of the project, I think from around the early 1940s or so, which shows at time, the structure has actually decreased in size over the years. There was a full enclosed wraparound porch where now there is just elevated deck. There was an addition off the back side of the house in this area here that subsequently was removed. And this stairway that used to come to the half-story, which was located on the front of the house, was then relocated to the side of the house here. So there's been some structural change to the structure since it was first constructed. Currently, they are before the HDC with some minor modifications or renovations to the structure. And that application, I think, has already had 1 or 2 meetings with the HDC. The proposal itself is to, number one, bring the cottage into compliance with the current flood zone requirements, which means elevating the structure approximately 2.5 feet or so above the grade that it is now. It is currently, the structure is currently a first floor of 8.4, and the new flood zone in this area is a 10.4. So there's a 2-foot rise there. It is not in a velocity zone, so the requirement is to simply have the first floor elevated above the flood zone, and that's what the intent here is to do. The majority of that work would involve, obviously, coming into the site from Wauwinet Road, elevating, removing all the decking and boardwalking around it, elevating the structure, and placing a foundation system underneath the existing dwelling. In doing so, then returning the site basically to a expanded or relocated, I guess, use. It's basically still going to be a residential use, 2-bedroom, because we're maxed out at the 2-bedroom. We can't expand the bedrooms based on the septic system location on the site. The proposal that you have is a second plan, which kind of depicts the green would be areas of improvements essentially that are to be removed, and then the blue shading represents areas of replaced or proposed improvements on the site. So the back line here is the coastal dune. That would be removing this decking along the backside and the boardwalk along the backside of the coastal dune, and then also removing decking along the south side and along the west side front of the house, and removing also boardwalk in this area here. None of this really occurs within the coastal dune, as the coastal dune is demarcated out there. That would simply be within areas that would be within 25 to 50 of the coastal dune, and then again everything is within the barrier beach. So those are the green areas that would be removed. They would then be looking to, in replacing of the decking that wrapped around here, they would maintain the existing boardwalk along the front, expand this boardwalk in this area to connect to the driveway, and then add a section of decking along this side here, along the south side of the existing structure. The intent being to basically confine activity on the site to the driveway, boardwalks, and then the site itself along the boardwalks connected to the house. There is also a landscape plan that's submitted as part of the application, which defines, basically defines the planting areas, which essentially removes the front of the site right now is a mix of Rosa rugosa and beach grass. Along the side is some natural vegetation, and basically it's a replacement of beach grass, if you will, throughout the front section of the existing home. There would be a shell driveway, which would be mimic what's already there right now, and then the decking itself would be a wraparound along the site here. So that's included within the application. As I had mentioned, the area is mapped NHESP. We have made submittal as part of the notice of intent filing and have not received a response at this point. We do have our DEP file number, but we do not have a response yet from National Heritage. The project itself does require waivers, and we have submitted a waiver requirement with regard to Section 203B 2 and 5, 204B 6 and 2, and 2.10B2, and those relate to the coastal dune, the barrier beach, and the land subject to coastal storm flowage. The waivers have been asked for under the premise that will provide a long-term net benefit to the resource area with regard to the septic system upgrade that would be proposed, and the confining of the work to essentially the boardwalk, the raising of the house to the flood zone elevation, and have also provided, respectfully submit that the provisions of 103F3D are applicable as the structure predates the adoption of the Wetland Protection Act. The waiver itself sets forth the interested protected with regard to public and private water supply. There'll be no change to that. We'll still be tied to the Wallwinnet well. With respect to groundwater, fisheries, shellfish, recreation, water pollution, wetland scenic views, all that would be no change. No changes in the landscape that would cause a change or movement of wildlife. Flood control and damage prevention, cottage will be able to comply with the NFIP standards, and the project will be protected during the construction phase for work with regard to erosion. I didn't mention too, there's actually two on the other side of Wallwinnet Road. There's actually a combination of, there's an isolated wetland, there's a bordering vegetated wetland, there's another isolated wetland, all that occur on the other side of Wallwinnet Road, and that buffer zone is also shown. If you'll see here, this area of the site does clip the approximate 100-foot buffer zone to these approximate wetland areas that are across the street on Wallwinnet Road. Again, two isolated areas and then a bordering vegetated wetland on the opposite side of Wallwinnet Road. I've depicted two septic options on the plan. I'm exploring either one right now. We have either a tight tank option, which is similar to what we did on the property diagonally across here, and then the other option is a IA system located to the south of the existing structure, which I have identified an area that we could potentially put in a system, an alternative technology system within this area over here. The other option would be simply the tight tank as we did across the street. The property to the south had been redeveloped maybe 4 or 5 years ago. That had an existing system within the coastal dune, which was upgraded to an IA system. However, our system here is in the front of the lot. It's in the barrier beach. We're not in the coastal dune, and we don't propose or expect that we would be have any type of approval for putting a system within the backside of the coastal dune. So the two options are either the tight tank or the IA system on the south side of the existing structure. The approximate difference, I think, between the area of the improvements existing to propose is about 174 square feet, and that is an increase. However, the area of between the 25, and I didn't really get too much into the 25 and the 50, only because the entire areas of area beach, it's all resource area essentially. We're completely within the resource area, but we have within the limit of the line for the coastal dune. You can see the green areas; those are more so areas that are being removed along the backside of the structure where the coastal dune is, and those will be allowed to revegetate. And one would expect that there would be some movement and maybe the expansion of that coastal dune over time. Right now, it's strictly boardwalk, and there is a concrete block retaining wall that runs along the entire backside of that property that retains basically the section of the dune up against the backside of that decking along the backside. And be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have with regard to the application.
Any questions for Paul?
For that retaining wall, is that staying there or being removed? I wasn't sure what you were saying.
I think the intent is to leave the retaining wall in the area where
Right
we're
there.
maintaining the deck.
Right.
It can be removed for the remaining section. There's no reason really to keep it there, other than the planting area along the backside.
For that dune to reestablish?
Yeah, we could, that area back there could be, and just maintain the wall along that backside, and then it could be left to removed in that area.
Because that's part of the area that you're taking the house out, basically, or the deck out.
Correct.
It's
Yeah, that decking
closest
is
to the deck.
coming out of that area. That's right. Yeah.
Just for the success of it revegetating and for the dune to move, I mean, I think
That section of retaining wall, and I think it's about it.
unless it's needed structurally, that's it.
Well, that's the other thing, is whether or not we need it when they come along that backside.
So-
The deck is about 8, so there it's only, and it actually doesn't even run the entire length, quite honestly. It's 8, 9, it's only about 1.5 feet, 2 feet along that side. It actually stops right in that area. So it would only be this section that would be removed right here, and then potentially that section. But again, that may be needed just to keep that retainage along the back side of the wall there. So I'll check with the landscape architect and see what their intention was, whether they thought how they wanted to plant that back area and what they wanted to do, and I can see whether or not removing that presents an issue for them.
No, I don't have a strong feeling either way.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand.
Yeah. We still do need to maintain some of it though because we're leaving that section of deck in
Doesn't
place.
show the landscape plan.
Yeah, the wall didn't show on it, but yeah.
Speaking of the landscape plan, are these trees already in place, or are they to be planted?
No, those trees that are depicted over here are all trees that are existing.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the only thing that's out is basically this right here is a tree line, that heavy line right there. This is all coastal dune with grass, and then this is all planted. The front area is all planted Rosa rugosa along that side. But no, those are existing trees that are out there right now.
And as far as the choice of the septic systems, do you need to get health department or
Yes.
somebody's
Yeah, I mean, the
approval?
client would prefer not to have, he's living with a tight tank, he's living with a tight tank on another property he's got down in this area. He'd prefer to go with the IA system, quite honestly. But again, that, depending upon what we can arrange with waivers and how we can position that system out there. We do have some ability because we are lifting the grade, it's a very shallow groundwater table out here. We don't really have the ability to mount a system in the front, just because of the way that it naturally does. But we do have some room because the house is coming up 2 feet. We may have a little bit of room to get the system up a little bit along this side where we're raising the house, and that was the only thought with potentially putting in a standard set of leaching trenches along that side. He'll like to do either one. I mean, I'd like to do this system here, but if the tight tank is the only option, it would be out in the front, similar to what he has along the cottage that we did over here. I think it was 127 or one of the ones over there. So,
I kind of like the idea of a tight tank myself.
I do too.
well,
Yeah.
and I think the Board of Health would quite honestly prefer the tight tank too.
It's
You
just
know,
easier to control.
Yep.
Especially how shallow is the groundwater?
2 feet maybe?
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it was that system was done, I think it was around, I think it was a 4 foot, because they had a 4 foot water table, and I think they had a 2 foot separation up to the bottom of the trenches that were there. So the system that's there now was, put in with waivers, with a stipulation that the house could never be expanded with regard to bedrooms and so forth, that it was a 2-bedroom system, it'll always stay a 2-bedroom system.
And 2 feet of dune sand isn't going to do much.
No. So.
it gonna have-
And they did have actually, in fact, Art did the system on this property over here, but like you said, he had the benefit of the fact that the system was already in the dune and it was elevated. He had some room in the back, he could get some groundwater separation, and that's what we told the client. Of course, the first thing I said, well, if they did it over there, why don't we just, a little bit different situation.
But it doesn't, you're going to have to get a waiver for 2 feet separation of groundwater for the footings, or?
Well, no, because that's not within the, that's only within the bordering vegetated wetland
Oh, that's
requirement.
right.
That is
That's
correct.
mostly area leach, yeah.
So, yeah, it doesn't matter what the gum appears or
Yep.
stuff.
So.
Anything from the public on Zarella? Okay. Jeff, do we have everything we need to close the hearing?
No.
No, we haven't.
We're waiting to hear from Natural Heritage, so
Okay.
we are unable to close.
So, Paul, would you like to continue?
Yes,
2 weeks?
please.
Unless I hear an objection, we'll continue this. Jeff.
That's one. Are you guys interested in getting a draft order for that one?
I think so. I would think we would.
Okay. I'll draft that for next time. And include with Natural Heritage's comments or something like that. Include those.
So we'll continue this to September 3rd then?
Thank you.
Okay, amended orders. Nielsen, 21 Winoma Way.
He's a big seller for the right, David.
David Haynes for the applicant. This is a request for an amendment to an order of conditions, and it's basically it's exactly the same word, except the proposed work is a renovation of an existing house and the construction of addition, and there was some reconfiguration of deck, there was a boardwalk, or beach chairs going out, excuse me. And we were going to renovate the existing house, and after they started looking at it closer, they feel that it would be better to tear it down to the first floor decking, down to the first floor, and rebuild the entire section, but it's the exact same design we were going to do before. Basically, the renovation included tearing apart the second floor, and once they started looking at things, the first floor also is in questionable shape, and so they would like to remove that down to the decking, leave the foundation won't change, and all other work stays the same.
Any changes in our resource area?
No, it doesn't change anything. There are a number of abutters here that are concerned, I shouldn't say what we talked, and they're concerned about the construction and the activity on the street and what that's going to do and things like that. I don't want to put words in their mouth, so.
Well,
The area?
What do you mean?
Oh, I see just the same map, but we don't have any kind of a pull-out as far as an overview of the area, the streets leading to this, or?
oh, it's kind of down there on,
I mean, I know approximately
For Winoma Way. I mean, I would say that without hearing specific concerns, but I mean, it's a paved, improved road that's there, and the road is actually outside of the 100-foot buffer zone from my jurisdiction, not to get picky, but I think we should hear specific concerns before we
Sure.
try to address them.
This is help.
Yeah, no, that's exactly just
Put them up here. Which way you come down?
You come down Old Time Evers Road, and then onto Winoma Way.
This is the bluff down.
well, I had one thought more than anything, that, you've got, this house is in the buffer zone,
Right.
and you're going to take it down so far, and even though that bank is stable now, it's not stable too far either way, and it's certainly feasible that bank will start eroding in the, you don't know, nobody can predict this, but it could start eroding, and if you're going this far, it would seem to me you might as well move that house back as far in the lot as you can, so that you're not doing what SPPF is doing,
We did look into that as part of the first application, and because of the location of the existing septic system, we can't move the house or the addition any farther towards the road. And so we did look at that.
I think you mentioned that during the site visit, I think.
Oh, okay.
Or brief site visit.
Because I asked that question first.
it
Ah.
never starts when you're
Yeah.
going to this extent.
And at that point, they were just renovating, so I asked it a second time, and they were going to basically take it down.
Well, there's an old septic leach pit. Isn't there a upgraded septic on this? That, what I see here, the driveway is.
This is abandoned.
It was inspected and it passed whatever the system is. I don't know the system. I've just been told that that's where it is, so.
Well, to be clear, because this is a question that I asked when I was reviewing this for an amendment and whether it needed to be a separate filing or not. And one of the key components that I talked about with Mr. Sullivan, who had stamped the plan, is that the existing foundation that's there is remaining. And that to me was at least a significant distinction, is we're not removing a foundation to put a new one in. It's staying on one that's already currently installed. So really the major disturbance to the actual earth that's there has already occurred and is already in existence. So, because It's not clear from the plan, so I know I'd asked about it specifically, so I just wanted to clarify that because it's a little
I
confusing.
asked that question a long time ago, too.
Yeah.
Well, you're also left with just looking at impacts on resources and going down one story or going down two stories to the top of the foundation.
Do you have existing deck to be removed?
It's tough to see
Yes, the deck.
much further impact on resource area, I think.
Correct. So just to clarify too, because it's a little tricky, the only thing that's really being requested in this case is if you look at the plan, the square that's labeled existing 1.5-story wood frame dwelling is what's going from, instead of the second floor being renovated to completely being renovated, but everything else that you see there has already been approved under the original order.
Yep.
Sounds,
Including the vegetative buffer being planted in the yard.
Yeah.
It's some good things, I think.
anything else from the commission? Okay, public comment. Anything from the public?
My name's Brian Donovan.
Could you come up and speak into the mic, please, Brian?
I just heard today about this for the first time. I guess we're out of the zone where we would get notice from the assessors maps, but anytime I hear a house is getting torn down, obviously I think it's something probably I should be interested in. But my concern only is, and I spoke to Mr. Haynes about this, the existing foundation apparently isn't going to get moved, or it's going to stay there. So in my experience, which is limited, and I'm not an engineer, I do have a building license, but that would probably indicate to me that that's stable. It's not going to move too much. I don't know how much the footprint's going to be increased or where that's going to be, because I haven't seen the plan. But if it's to the back of the lot, that would seem to me to impact whatever the cliff is.
Well,
And-
apparently it's going to, they're just going to stay.
Is this the plan here?
That's the plan.
Do you mind if I look at this? Okay, so the house is here,
Here's the street.
yeah,
Here's the existing house.
right, and, yeah, this is like yeah.
It came
Yeah,
up.
I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know, and somebody else expressed here on the board that, you know, there might be some concern about stabilization of the, you know, the cliff and stuff. Is this house limited by the 1,500 square foot? Does anybody know that?
It's limited by zoning, whatever the zoning is.
Yeah. Okay, so the addition is gonna be this, and then that's a deck?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, again, the only concern is, I heard the house was gonna be torn down, so my question is what's gonna be put up there? But from talking to Mr. Haynes, it sounds to me like it's gonna be a two-story house.
I'm just going to rebuild it.
You know, this is not the zoning board hearing, it's gotta comply with the zoning, but, so the proposal is that they put this addition on the side, and not being an engineer, I don't know what effect that's gonna
Well,
have.
we already approved that, so he's
Yeah.
just coming back
Right.
before it was going to get
Right.
renovated, and now it's
Well,
just going
so, but that would be my only comment, is about the foundation not having to be moved or anything done to it. Because Mr. Haynes said they were gonna take it right down to the deck level.
Yeah, so,
Okay. All right. Oh. So maybe I don't have any comment really, but.
okay, well,
Sorry,
thank
appreciate
you.
you letting me get up and say my piece.
Always good to
Anything else?
Yes, my name is Susan Matloff, and I do live
Could you come up
close
so you
enough
can
that
speak into the mic,
I was
please?
notified for this. I'm concerned about where the well and septic would have to go if there was an emergency. The house right next door to this house did have to change their septic, and that was put in the street in Winoma. And that house is right next door to this one. And so I want to know about the well and septic, and is there an emergency backup if there is more erosion? On that end of Winoma, it goes 3 more houses, and then what looks like lots on the original plan do not exist anymore. They are gone because of erosion. So my concern is the erosion and the condition of Winoma too. Because we have, this gentleman who is doing this house also did a house across the street. And at the time that the construction was done, it was very disruptive. We couldn't get out of our driveway. I had to finally call the police. The workmen wouldn't move their trucks. They wouldn't. And we can't get down Nichols because Nichols is in such bad condition. It's that you would need a pickup truck to go down there. So it would be a hardship for all of us unless something more considerate is done than was done previously.
Well, we don't have
I know
the
that's not
authority
your-
to regulate
yeah.
traffic.
I've said that I would
Yeah.
speak to the
Yeah.
owner and ask him, tell him that this happened before, because apparently it was the general contractor that was,
Same one.
and so
Yeah.
I will speak to I'll speak to
Yeah.
the owner and say
So-
that there were concerns, and apparently the lawn had already been.
He seeded it. He
They'd already
hydro-seeded it, so-
hydro-seeded the lawn before they started working on the house, which
Yeah.
doesn't sound like the brightest
Yeah,
thing.
so they couldn't pull their trucks on their lawn, so they just put
So they
it.
parked in the
Yeah.
street.
But my main concern really is the well and septic, and if they're gonna, if it's going to be put in the street, or if it failed and they had to put it in the street, or if this house is larger and needs another
No.
well, or,
David, you said it was inspected?
It was inspected and passed the inspection, and that's, they were keeping it. It appears as though there, I don't know where any other wells are, but it appears there's an area closer to the street where they could put a replacement for the septic. The well is back here by the bluff,
when
going
you say
towards.
close, the other one went right in the street.
Well,
In the middle of the
yeah,
road.
but every site is different. This site, there looks like there's space between, there and the street to put it without actually going into the road.
And then my other concern is the height,
The height of the house is remaining exactly the same.
same as it is now.
And you're changing the roof. It's going from a cape to a salt box, or a salt box to a cape. I can't remember.
I would say too, that would be something for people that have concerns about things like height and architectural issues too. You should be receiving notice in regards to any HTC filing, and they would.
None of these people
I think
who
they were.
sitting here
Did they?
received a notice. I was the other one.
I would check in with the with Mark Voigt, the administrator of the HTC, about concerns regarding the architectural and the building height and those things.
I don't know that this new plan has come up.
So I would definitely touch base with them because they would be the appropriate.
The other thing is if the change
Is less than,
is, they do not have to notify if the change is less than 1,000 square feet.
yeah, it used to be 500.
Yeah.
That's pretty
So
good.
if
So-
the work being proposed is under 1,000 square feet, they don't have to send out another
So
notification.
I would encourage.
That's not contacting us.
Yep, and they'll be able to help you, and that's the appropriate board to have those concerns and bring those up, and they'll discuss those at length and discuss those as part of their open meeting, so.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Harvey Matloff. I'm Susan's husband. One of my concerns is the erosion in this area, okay? This property, there are two homes next door. And then when we moved in some 28 years ago to this area, Winoma was called Atlantic. I don't know if you guys remember that. And it went all the way down to the old naval base. Now, all you have to do, if you want to go out there and have a sense of the instability of this area, is go out there and walk down Winoma, past this house, and you will find that what used to be Atlantic is no longer there. Because of erosion, the road has fallen over the side, okay? There is no road. So what was left, people, put lawns in and things to make it look more sightly. Because that whole area collapsed. And there have been homes that have been built closer to where the old VFW was, which we all know what happened there. And those homes had to be moved because of erosion. So I don't think anybody here can really predict what is going to happen as far as erosion. And what happens, the building of this house just might have an effect on the homes of other people adjacent to this home, abutters. So I have concern about the environmental impact of construction, putting a larger, heavier structure there, and water runoff from a larger home, and all the environmental issues that, because this home was relatively small, and I don't think it had much of an impact. I think a larger home very well might have more of an impact on this bluff. The homes that are by it, one is a reasonably large home, but it is set further back. But on these small parcels of land, the homes are relatively small, the same size as Mary. They were built by the same, largely by the same individual. And they were all relatively small, summer homes, electric heat, that type of thing. You know, this home is much larger, but it is in the same location, larger, with potential for environmental damage. The other thing, you know, which living right near there, when they do construction during the summer months, we have a number of people who rent, and there are children on tricycles that are there. People are on vacation, so they're not paying attention. It's really a dangerous thing. I can tell you that the gentleman who built and did Rudy's house did a nice job on that property. I have no complaint. I actually applaud him for what he did. But the construction, if there was an ambulance that has to get down this road to go to one of the neighbors further down the block, they're not going to be able to get down there. And these workers, when they block the road, they don't care. And you know, Winoma is not much wider than this table.
Sir, I understand your concerns, but again, we have no regulatory authority over any of that.
But you do, and that's why I'm addressing the issue with the bluff. I think it really is a matter of concern. Enlarging the house and changing the dynamics that will pose to the bluff. Because if there is a problem, it will affect the neighbors. You can't put it back. You know, we found that out in Wisconsin. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from the public? Okay. Anything else from the commission?
Pulled this up on Google Maps if anyone wants to see the general area. I'm happy to pass it down.
So this hearing's all about the, it's already been approved.
Yeah, it's already been
This
approved.
size,
This is the minor
and
mod.
relative to our
Amended order.
Yeah, it's an
standards
amended order.
that govern setbacks and so forth on stability, and this today is about whether or not to allow them to remove the first floor and build that fresh,
Right.
or whether to make them
There's no change in resource
build
area.
this thing on top of something that's not stable.
Yep.
I think this pretty much fits our
Or requirements.
requirements,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it's always hard when people are, distressed about something, and that's why we have the standards.
Mhm.
And when things are designed to fit the standards, we are kind of governed by that.
Yeah, the reason I'm passing around is it's pretty healthy amount of, there's lots of room there.
It's 135 feet from the toe of the bluff to the shoreline in there.
But it's 45 feet to the bluff. And now you have a house that's considerably larger, with considerably more runoff to that off that 45 feet.
The trick is we've already approved the
Yeah, well,
footprint.
you know.
Because nobody was notified?
Yeah. I don't know
Well,
when
because
was
it meets the
approved.
standards,
Well,
not because nobody was here to complain.
because nobody was notified.
Right.
Nobody was notified.
They live almost directly across the street.
Look, well, that is interesting that they didn't.
I mean, the minute we were notified, we came out here. But even the people that are here because we told them, not because they were properly notified, and they will be impacted as well.
The abutters that were on the abutters list from the assessor's office were notified.
Mhm.
We have that, we have those green cards.
Correct. We have them for both. They are in compliance for the amended order and the original one.
We asked them to prove to us when they filed for the first time that they sent out the cards to the abutters list.
And when was the first meeting held on this?
Jeff can probably tell you, or
If you give me a minute.
It was about a month. It was June 25th was the first meeting.
Do we have the green cards here, Jeff?
Yes.
We don't, I think we're,
And the abutters, the original abutters notifications for the first one
We do actually take
Yeah.
into account.
were
I mean,
mailed out
approved it.
on June 5th for our hearing on June the 25th.
What constitutes a letter?
In the Conservation Commission's case, an abutter is anyone that's within 100 feet of the property lines to the property. So a direct abutter or 100 feet out from the circle is how we're statutorily defined as abutters through the State Wetlands Protection Act on our local bylaw.
So it would be 4 people, 3 people.
Actually, it's more than that. It is.
Well, you can actually show them that one.
It is
The
13.
person who is petitioning to do this, actually, he is one of the abutters. So obviously that negates, if you have such a narrow radius like that, that negates 25% of the people, the abutters.
There were 13 people that were notified.
So they're in compliance with our mailing requirements. They're in compliance with the state notification requirements.
Do you have the list
He
of the
does.
13 people that were notified?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you read it?
I will hand
Probably
it to you.
available in the office, isn't it?
So we can handle it.
mhm.
Because part of it might be maybe if the assessor's office has the wrong information for your lot.
Right, they
It could
update.
be-
Mhm.
They just have to
Okay.
go with what.
A lot of the, also, just to be clear, a lot of abutter notifications will go to, if people own their houses in trust, whoever the trustee is listed as will get the mailing. There are lots of reasons why they go to different addresses. But applicants apply for an abutters list through the assessor. They receive it, understanding that that's the certified list from the assessor, and they send out the mailings accordingly. We check to make sure that they do, and in this case, they've met those requirements.
Okay, so if there's nothing else from the public or the commission, Jeff, do you have a recommendation on this?
I recommend that we can close and issue this as an amended order.
So have that motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go to the public meeting, minor modifications, Desert Island LLC, 13 Delaney Road, lot number 7.
Go back to David, I guess.
Does your name get on there now?
I'll give him the jet.
Here you are. Sorry about that. I'll trade you.
Okay, great.
I'm just surprised that one comes in front of us.
Children of the future, we'll be able to hear sirens. That was original.
Well, okay.
For the applicant, our guest borrow Blackmore Associates. Before you tonight with the minor modification that we had held over from the last meeting, there were some concerns. Well, let me start off by saying that this application originally was for the construction of a single-family dwelling with a pool, driveway, landscaping within the buffer zone to a vegetated wetland. We came in with a minor modification to rotate the house, move the pool, and make some modifications to the driveway. There were some clear concerns from the commission, so I discussed those with the client and the owner, and I have submitted a revised plan and letter, and that's what's before you tonight. So starting off, what I've highlighted in blue is the vegetated wetland boundary, and then in pink, the 25 and 50-foot buffer zones. Essentially, the entire project is within the 100-foot buffer zone. The light dashed line represents the approval as it stands right now from the original order of conditions, and the dark lines represent the proposed modification. Essentially, the house as approved was parallel with Cliff Road, and now they want to make it parallel with Delaney Road to the west. So there's a rotation of the structure to make that happen. I don't think there was much concern from the commission with the rotation and change to the house. The house also decreased in size by about 300 square feet. There also associated with the project was an approved pool located between the 25 and 50 foot buffer zone. A big part of this project was the removal of the justification, and the net benefit was for the removal of the existing asphalt driveway, which is shown as the stippled area on this plan. With the rotation of the house, they also want to rotate the pool to be parallel to the house. What we've done is from the last time you saw this, was to move the pool closer to the house, such that you can see that the pool itself, the closest point is no closer than the previous approval. I essentially, right around the middle of the pool, I pivoted there. Now, that's not to say that this corner, there is not more of the pool that is within that same distance. So I don't want to be disingenuous and not clear to you in presenting this, but the entire pool itself, the closest point is now no closer than it previously was approved. The other portion of the application initially presented that I heard some concerns about related to the driveway, and the proposed driveway at the last modification application, the applicant wanted to extend the driveway straight in and would have become closer to the wetland, and though it would have been within the existing driveway. We've removed that portion of the proposal such that the driveway that's closest to the wetland remains as previously approved, and we simply have a proposed modification to the driveway here, closer to the house, so the dark lines would then left that as approved. And just since I was at the other end of the table, the pool, that's the point that we did here. So this point, it's the same distance as no closer, but there is that portion as part of the rotation. So it's really, again, as the plans have been refined to sort of what they finally want to build during the process, this is, a twist really, but trying to keep the same features. And ultimately, the limit of work remains the same. We're not proposing anything any closer than what was previously approved. And with that, I'd be happy to try to address questions or concerns that you may have.
Any questions from the commission for Jeff?
Can you jump on the roof into the pool?
No.
Because I had time to ask that
Not a
question.
good thing these days.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So how much does that change from 25 to 50? So the lines you have here are at the 25 and at the 50.
That's correct.
And but it's not changing a lot of the disturbed area that was already.
No, again, this was this was a site that was all lawn.
Yeah.
So we're working within disturbed area. We're not changing the limits of work or the extended disturbance.
Is that retention area new? The proposed?
No, that was always approved. Again, that's part of the project, is to have the line that shows the Ds is to have all of the downspouts connected to a subsurface infiltration system so that we don't have surface runoff carrying any pollutants into the wetland.
Just as a quick reminder too, seeing where we are with Clifford and Delaney, this is also the wetland that, if you're on site, the wetland's probably about 4 feet wide. And there's a house that's directly adjacent to it on the abutting property.
Right, so a ditch, really.
Yeah, it's
Quite
With the privet hedge and
Yeah, it's an
It's
old.
under exactly, it's quite unusual.
just local.
So what I would say is, right, exactly, looking at the interest protected by the commission and the values within this particular resource area, I don't see how the modification really is going to have a negative impact on either of those.
And they decrease the size of the house.
That's correct.
Okay, if there's no further questions, or is there? Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
I recommend this could be approved as a minor modification.
Do I have that motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Okay, O'Brien, 18 Medowee Creek Road.
I'm actually going to hand this one from Lower Schofield. Not to do it off from Jeff Carlson, the applicant. But if you guys remember, this was the project on the O'Brien property in Medowee Creek that involved the installation of a split rail fence.
Oh, yeah.
And that split rail fence was permitted at a very set width. And through kind of resolving the issues with appeals and those things, they've agreed and they are requesting to essentially move the width of that fence from the originally permitted 10 feet to 13 feet across. So the whole fence is shifting out. It's not changing any areas as it relates to buffer zones directly for what they would have been in and what they were not, but they're just trying to permit more space for construction access and vehicle access to go across the O'Brien property up to the water's edge property. So instead of being a 10-foot wide or 11-foot wide fence, it's now going to be 13 feet wide.
White fence or roadway?
The roadway will be 13 feet, but the fence will be 13 feet apart as opposed to 11.
13 feet apart, yeah.
Yep. So they're just asking to shift that out. Again, it's not changing setbacks that it was already currently in from where it was currently approved. It's just a
So it was previously approved for fencing both sides of this.
correct.
little
The
area.
original
They're just-
approval
they're
was
just
for
asking for it to be wider.
right. So the original fencing proposal was to run along the existing traveled way and to be 11 feet across to provide an 11-foot roadway, and they are asking to push it out a little bit to allow for a 13-foot roadway or dirt track. That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Any questions or comments from the commission? Okay.
An observation, I'll toss out.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
We spent quite a bit of hearing time on this, and the parties had various professed concerns about the fragility of the environment and where the vehicles are going to be and the need to have it be no wider than, just narrower than a vehicle or whatever the idea was at the time. Sort of ironic to have them come back and now saying we've handled our issues that are extraneous to Conservation Commission, so those concerns now have gone away. It's kind of hard for me to swallow.
So this change doesn't look like it changes anything in the resource area or any impacts?
No, it's still the same
Whatever.
compliance, the same
Yeah.
waivers that were involved before. So this gives a little bit more
There was some
width for
vernal
travel.
pool issues or
There was
something there, wasn't there?
Correct.
Vernal
There
pools
were
in
some
that
vernal
little,
pool issues.
Bog there.
Yep, but this, the change from, in the width isn't changing the
Yeah, the
separation
whole
of
thing
those
on the
areas.
interpretation of the setback to the vernal pool and a whole bunch of legalistic arguments we
It's not moving anything closer.
soldiered through.
Yes, it was an exciting hearing.
Now those have all gone away.
Mm-hmm. Imagine that.
Too tight for the SUV.
Well, sometimes, Mr. Galacki, people gain more education and a better understanding of their impacts and what the resource areas are, can change their opinion over time.
Yes.
It's just cynic, Mr. Carlson.
Okay.
Skeptic.
Just saying.
So,
You're
Jeff,
motivated, you say.
I would recommend that this could be approved as a minor modification.
do I have that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, that motion carries with Commissioner Glowacki opposed.
I like it.
Okay, that takes us to certificates of compliance. Nantucket Islands Land Bank, 181 Hummock Pond Road.
All right.
Drew, I think, do I have to not sit on this?
Yes, you do not.
Okay. So Nantucket Islands Land Bank, 181 Hummock Pond Road.
Correct. So this was the application that was in front of us some time ago for the replacement of that walkway across the marsh on the Gardner property. They've completed the construction and provided some nice photographs and a nice as-built plan.
They got their big equipment out of there.
Correct. We dealt with that issue separately, and I think their pictures are pretty nice because you can actually see that there's vegetation starting to come back through
Come through.
the grading. And if you actually go out and when we did our site inspection, there's a pretty significant amount beneath that structure. And it looks,
Pretty good.
in my opinion, that it's a vast improvement from the boardwalk that used to just lay on the mud and sink in and get covered in water. Yep, so I would recommend that we could issue a certificate of compliance for this project. I'm jumping on, but.
Dogs don't like to.
Dogs don't like to walk on
At
it.
all.
No, the fiberglade's not.
Totally, at all.
Yeah, it's odd for them. Heard that from a lot of people.
It's like
Ours.
trying to get them on boats, same
Yeah.
thing. They can see through it, they don't like it.
And it just feels weird for them. But
Don't want to jump.
nice to run across.
The other one was slippery.
Yeah,
All right.
The older one was
Yeah, that looks
really
creepy.
good. It's just unused, yeah.
The other one's dangerous.
Let's keep it moving.
Okay, so anybody have any questions?
None.
Okay. Do I have a motion on whether to issue the certificate of compliance?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Certificate is issued.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, James Feely, 5 North Liberty Street.
All right, so this was the project on 5 North Liberty Street, if you guys remember. That was for the construction, some retaining walls, granite steps, and a lawn area. This also had a hot tub associated with it. Over on North Liberty Street, and as built, if people want to see it. It was a pretty straightforward project for us. It did require waivers. This was also the project that the lawn area had originally extended all the way down to the BVW, and is kind of all there that they planted back into buffer zone areas. It's not a huge buffer zone in some spots, but it is there. On our inspection, excuse me, on our inspection, it was in compliance with their original order, and I would recommend that this could also be issued.
So moved.
We have a second. Oh, Sarah,
I was just going to ask if there's any conditions that carried over.
No.
No, okay.
do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Okay. Cassell's, 3 North Gully Street.
All right, this one is a little bit more interesting for what's there, but I'll try to explain it, and Mr. Madden is here as well. He may be able to explain a little bit too. This was a site that was for some site work and some revegetation and some plantings. The one thing that has changed about this site, if you guys see where it is on, I only have the one copy of the plan, so I do apologize for this, but on North Gully Road with Codfish Park Road, is originally the setbacks in the coastal dune when they were doing the project wasn't located, and as the beach has kind of eroded and moved, some of the plantings that they had done and some of the beach grass plantings that have been required have since been reclaimed by the sea on a few occasions. So the work had been done and documented before, and the site is in compliance with their order. The changes to the site that wouldn't necessarily be in compliance aren't from the applicant, in this case, doing work or doing an activity. It's because the coastal dune and the coastal beach and the ocean have migrated closer to the structure. So, I don't have any ongoing conditions or anything for this one, but this is.
Is this the very last one to, when you don't have
Correct.
Codfish Park, you make that turn?
Yes.
Yes, right in the corner.
So those are really different. Did I catch all those changes correctly, Brian?
Yeah.
So that's just part, I'll explain a little bit more. Part of the project, some of the mitigation for what was going on was the replanting of these plants. They were done. The beach has since eroded, so they're no longer there, so those mitigation plantings aren't there. They were there, but they weren't removed by willing choice. They were taken by.
The beach grown there, or?
The beach down in Codfish Park is
It's pretty healthy.
it's pretty healthy. It's just the plantings that were done as part of it. The substrate has significantly changed, and the dynamics of that area have changed, and the vegetation has kind of adjusted somewhat. And occasionally, obviously, in storm activity, sometimes it does take some water on. So the changes were made by nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just point out, yeah. So you guys actually saw them though, Jeff, you saw?
Yes. I have, and I've spoken with both their applicant and the owner as well, and discussed that they had been there, and they've done a pretty good job of documenting those, and that they've disappeared.
The dune scarp moved back like 25, 30 feet. And the woody shrubs were lost, but we were able to replant beach grasses within that mitigation area to stabilize it. I think we submitted some photos.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Do I have a motion to issue?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Okay, Shea Realty Trust, 7 Alliance Lane.
All right. So this is the last one. I do apologize for this. This one is very old. So we did a little bit of homework to dig it out with their attorney. This was an order that was originally issued in 1993. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. It's off, Alliance is off of Deal Point Road.
Off Deal Point Road, okay. I never guessed that.
Just want to be sure I get this correct. This was for some septic work and septic components and some work on the house. So we were able to find through the Board of Health records the actual as-built. I do apologize that it's in pieces, but the as-built for the septic system as constructed under this order. And correct, they did move the house as well. But that house was originally outside of our jurisdiction. So the work that was done was for part of that. The work in 1994 from the as-built plan looks like it was done in compliance, and the site is still relatively the same, and it seems to be in compliance from our inspection. I would have no reason to believe that it's not. Again, some of these with the really old ones, going off old as-built plans, I'm kind of taking the word of the plan that the septic was installed correctly at the time. Did receive a certificate of compliance from the Board of Health. I don't have any ongoing conditions for it, so I'd recommend this could be issued too, and we can be rid of this one. That's old and outstanding forever.
Okay.
Do I have that motion?
You do.
Second.
All in favor? Any
It's SC
opposed?
48, 736, so
That's the one.
That motion carries
we just rolled over
unanimously.
2,700, so it's been 2,500.
Okay, so, orders of conditions.
All right, 1 second. I'll pass out. We only have one to go over tonight. We have the one for, I say TAC 3, or you like to say TAC. But I'll pass out the draft of that real quickly here. We didn't close anything else. All right, so you guys want to take one and pass them around. Just as you're getting them and pass them around, I couldn't really think of too many conditions for that project. It seemed pretty straightforward in there, but I wanted to spend a little extra time looking at the waiver request a little bit. So I added a little bit to it as far as applying for the reduction of structural area to be a net benefit, but then for the remainder of the project, that's not part of the reduction. Some of the other things that required waivers is not an adverse impact. There's no reasonable alternative just because of the condition of the site currently. The one thing that I may add, and it's something that I missed, and I apologize for this, I would also like to add a sentence or two in regards to the structure as it relates to the wetland across the street where it intersects that 50, and grant that waiver under the other provision, which allows for the resource area to be separated by the subject property by an area out of control of the applicant, which is typically a public way. So in this case, where the road separates the wetland from the new structure, you can apply and be granted waivers because you can't have a direct influence over that wetland because there's something substantial, essentially, in the way or in between.
We talked about too, including some of the grades for the pathway should not change.
Sure, we can add a condition 20
Should be
that
maintained, yeah.
Should be maintained.
grades on the path shall be maintained.
that's the only thing we mentioned specifically.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be very difficult site
So-
to work on.
I know we haven't done a lot of these, so this is typically the section for, this is primarily for David and Ashley. If there's are issues that have come up or conditions, like this is a good example where the path was being discussed, that when we're conditioning, if it came up in discussion, we can add to the draft, or we can take conditions away that may have been drafted on there to kind of better shape the project to our standards. So in this case, where there's a concern about water getting down the path and getting into the harbor, freshwater discharge essentially, that we can ensure that that path maintains that kind of central crown to drain back the one direction.
Keeps it from going over.
Correct. So if there's anything else that fits and helps protect our performance standards, this is the time and place to add it.
Yeah, I think that, no alternative, real adverse impact is more appropriate.
Yeah, I still wanted to make note of the fact that reduction of area within our buffer zones that wasn't originally compliant is a net benefit, but it's not the sole, because I'm reducing my area by 20 square feet, I get waivers for a big project, that there are still other pieces to spell out to those waivers, and they receive them for other aspects of the project.
I would assume the silt fence on this one is going to be super important too.
Yeah, so that's just real quickly too, since we don't talk about these often. Part of our standard conditions for the installation of silt fences includes a notice to the commission that work is starting. They send that to our office. They come into myself and review it, and we say that's there. But then they usually inform us when silt fences have gone in, and then we usually have a 72-hour window to go and inspect. Usually we turn it around same day. To be honest, a lot of the places have started to do it. Not to pick on anyone, but Miles Reese has started when they install silt fence. They send us photos that are clearly of the site, show the silt fence that's installed. They'll just send it by email, and then I'll usually just field verify it, but it gives me something to say. It's in. If you guys want to continue with your site preparation, go ahead. I'll inspect it later this afternoon, but right now from the photos, it looks like it's in an okay, and it speeds it up a little bit for everyone, so it's not that full 3-day window where you're waiting for us to go look.
Okay, so do I have a motion to issue this as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Okay. So that got us through all of that.
Now I want to go on.
So other business.
Sorry. I had big intentions to have minutes in this packet, but I got kind of all consumed in preparation for our site visits and things today.
How did that turn? Just the one at Fulton? How did that go?
I didn't make it.
Oh, you
You didn't make it either.
I didn't get back to town until 1:45. It started at 1, so I missed.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
reports.
for those of us who didn't make the site visit today, and also maybe didn't get the reminder at the site visit about the executive session today, do you think that it's possible that after we conclude here, that we might just get a briefing by the staff after the public hearing closes, or the public meeting closes on the executive session? Just like 2 minutes or something?
Yeah, sure. That's no problem. We can just wait and essentially kind of reconvene that session. We've already advertised
Just
it
kind of
today.
hit the highlights of it.
Yep, we can definitely do that.
Overall here, that's right.
Yes.
Okay. So reports, CPC.
I attended my first CPC meeting. I haven't been lined up with any projects yet, but it looks like I might be having to do with the upgrade of the shellfish building, the old Coast Guard boathouse. But there are also other new members, and one, Tara Kelly, who's resigning, who's from Park and Rec. I didn't know Park and Rec existed anymore, but she's a representative of it. Anyway, but, yeah, I'm learning.
Well, just to help out with that a little bit, the submission deadline for CPC is coming up in I believe, the second week of September.
September 12th, I think.
Yeah, so that's when a lot of those will come in. And you'll be lucky to know, ma'am, that for that Brant Point facility, you'll be getting to deal with me for that project too. It's on
Right,
one of
well,
ours, so-
everybody seems to be lining me up with it, so that's, I may get me involved. And I
You'll
know
be-
a little bit about it. I don't know if that's, good or not. But-
You'll be stuck seeing me even more.
Okay,
Which is part of the harbor
okay.
plan, too. So, upgrade that.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. NPEDC,
Nothing.
nothing. Mosquito control.
There's going to be a mosquito control meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock at the DPW office. That's a publicly listed meeting for the company that's doing mosquito control work for the island to present their findings. And we just were a mosquito control district finally, after probably 20 years worth of trying to get approved, has finally been approved for Nantucket. So how that affects us is that actually gives the town leeway in areas where they want to do treatments to not necessarily have to come to the Concom to ask for a permit. The good news is, I'm on the mosquito control committee, and they're doing strictly larviciding and deep dip testing. I don't see anything that they're doing that's a big concern. I think if it was something like ditch removal or cleaning, they would come to us.
Yeah.
So I think that the intent there is actually to be very above board, and this has been a good year for mosquitoes. Or there's not very many mosquitoes.
Yeah, doesn't
Good
seem
year
to
for
be.
us. Bad year for mosquitoes.
Bad year for
Bad year for
mosquitoes.
mosquitoes. Though with that supermoon last week, next week's not going to be fun. But I've got like 5 million babies
Great.
in my lab right now, so you can tell.
Yeah.
But I'll also on Saturday at 10:30 at the field station, they'll be doing a public presentation of their whole program. So that's open to the public and free refreshments at 10:30 at the field station. I think that's all for that.
Okay. Any other committees? Okay. Commissioners' comments. Anything from Mike?
I do have, Mr. Chairman, I'll try to say this as sensitively as I can, because I know there are different viewpoints on it. But the order of conditions that we just issued on the Washington Street project does, to me, point out sort of the ongoing issue that I apparently did not articulate as clearly as I could have when we last discussed invasive species and we were doing our regs. And so it comes down to really just a handful. But on today's application, we have the Acer pseudoplatanus and we have the Rosa rugosa. And we had some reference made to invasive species in both of them. And the Acer, of course, is on our current regulatory list, and the rugosa rose is not, despite the fact that, to my knowledge, the Commission does not possess the documentation as to how those species did or did not meet the objective criteria. I know we got that there was an advocacy group that meets privately and advises that one is invasive and the other is not. But what we were asking for then was the objective criteria. There's a fairly straightforward process approved at the state level that you go down. It's kind of like a wetlands determination, and if I can just be allowed to finish it. And if we had that, I think it would point out sort of a couple of things, because also to my knowledge, the sycamore maple does not act invasively on Nantucket, and the rugosa rose does, and they're just reversed on the list for what I think are openly admitted to be political considerations. So I think there's a bit of work that we have yet to do on invasive species if we can find a way to get at it at an appropriate time.
Hold on. So if you look at our regulations, we actually adopted the state list in full for our invasive plant species committee and for our conservation commission. What I was suggesting is for the 2 new members that the process that we went through for adopting our current regulations for the invasive plants that we recognize as a condition, which include the entire Massachusetts state list, be brought and presented to both of you guys so you can see where the thinking is. It's listed right there in the regulations, which maybe Jeff can bring up with this as we speak, where I've got a copy of the regulations.
Well, and we have,
So the state list is included in toto in our regulations. So anything on the state list is considered by our commission to be an invasive plant. We do allude to that. I can get the language.
Yes, well, the state list hasn't been adopted here. Sycamore maple is on that list, but I do think I agree with Mr. Glowacki in the sense that, and we discussed this a little last time, is the commission needs to take a somewhat more active role in invasive species management, on how we're determining invasive species. And there's lots of good work being done in the invasive plant committee on island and other sources, both at the state level, but we could be doing more to enhance our own list and enhance our own practices, and possibly suggesting plants or putting together information or having a review for us, because we're going to continually get projects that come forward that include plants that may be listed or may not be listed, that may be acting or may not be acting. So I think it would be helpful for us to be all versed and have a good set criteria to how to deal with those plants when we come across them. I mean, just as an example, we see poison ivy and grape come in all the time. That
which we don't consider invasive.
Correct.
And our invasive plant species committee has presented, what, 7, 8, 9 years worth of local research on
And on that research that they presented, so those comments sort of hit half the point. Yes, for expediency purposes, we adopted the whole state list. We didn't go through which ones do or don't act invasively in Nantucket. We said if it's on the list, it's on the list. And I think it's just worth noting that. But the other part of my point was that 8 or 9 years' work that took place in that private committee, we were presented with the judgments, the conclusions, we were promised that we would have how those individual species meet this criteria that the state went through. But we did not, to my knowledge, receive that. And so there are a number of plants that are also on our list that we have determined to be invasive on the advice of a non-governmental advocacy group without the documentation. And I submit, and I suggest, and I'll bring it up from time to time, that if we went through the documentation, not all of those would really fit that, and maybe that some people got a little overzealous in their naming of invasive species is what's happened here.
The documentation was presented to the commission as a whole by the chair of the Invasive Plant Species Committee, who is a botanist that works with Nantucket Conservation Foundation. She presented all of her research, all the lists that she took off this in a very calm and reasonable manner. And I think she'd be happy to come back and present exactly where the Invasive Plant Species Committee, and Mike was here, and you guys can judge as new commissioners how you feel about the documentation at that time.
The documentation that was presented did not include the addressing of the state adopted criteria. It included sort of that the commission felt, that the commission voted, that the group decided. It did not include the objective criteria they were established, which is what, you know, which is sort of where I get stuck on things.
Well, you're stuck on the lack of reality, I'm sorry, but it did include.
Mr. Chairman, we have a little bit of order here.
Well, if it's an issue and we'd like to discuss it, and it's something that we'd like to have the people that work on these issues on island, or there may be someone from the state we can get, we can certainly schedule the time to focus specifically on invasive plants to come in and do that. And it would probably be helpful for everybody to go through it. A little refresher never hurts for anybody. So,
reality for everybody.
Yes. So if that's something we'd like to look into, I can contact the Invasive Species Committee here, and then a couple other resources that we have available to us to see about setting up a series of dates that we can pick from, to maybe not include it as part of our regular meeting, to obviously not gum up our business, but to have an invasive species specific meeting to discuss those things.
So just invasive plants 101, really what we're talking about is invasive exotic species.
Yes.
Because there are, again, people always complain about grape and poison ivy as they're native plants. In other words, they're plants that were on Nantucket prior to European settlement, that weren't brought here by people, that were here naturally occurring, whereas exotic plants are plants that are not been native to the island but have been brought here. And some of those exotic plants act in an invasive manner. Most of them probably don't, but some do. And some of the big ones are Japanese knotweed, purple loosestrife, Phragmites, oriental bittersweet,
porcelainberry.
porcelain berry, ooh.
Good example of
Exactly.
An example of something we might not have on our list is Mile a Minute, which is just reported for the first time on Nantucket.
Really?
It's in the Gardner property, I'm pretty sure.
But it's also,
Garden?
when we talk about resource protection and values of the resources, I don't know that we've articulated in our the distinction between native and non-native species. And you can have a native species that kind of gunks things up and creates an unhealthy situation as well. And you can have a non-native species that has a few volunteer seedlings, what used to be in the horticulture trade called volunteer, and a few sprout up here and there. And at what point does it become invasive is why you need to have a very disciplined process to work through.
I'll just add really quickly, our regulations do refer to these plants as invasive exotic plants. So, but it may be something like, I don't think it ever hurts for us to bring some experts in and go through it. And it's something that I know we discussed when we were doing our regulations last time, and I don't want to say it got swept aside, but there were more pressing issues at the time that I think it's something that would be good for us to really grab the bull by the horns and join in with other local groups that are doing it and have our own standards, and something for us to also team up on and have something that's really solid put together. So we don't have to have this debate. We have something that's set that everyone can kind of agree with, that we can tweak and make better over time, that helps us through our process.
Anything else from the commission? Okay, Jeff, do you have anything?
I do.
Additional?
Just a quick update for you guys heard last time. I know we talked about it, and we looked at the plan last time for the Hummock Pond Road wetland replication area. I have that with us, but I also put together the letter, and I apologize for getting around now, kind of outlining some steps again for us to hopefully kind of move from the step where we have sufficient area and those things to now starting to take that next step as far as plantings and fixing a couple other areas. So hopefully everyone got a copy of this around. I know there's a couple comments from the conservation restriction holder in this case. We should probably take in, again, we can make changes. I can get Ernie to get it and get it delivered. Really what we're kind of looking at time-wise, or what I'm proposing is, so by September 15th is to really address first and foremost the area in around the culvert for cleaning that sediment out and getting it there, and then getting some riprap installed to help control the flow and deal with water and sedimentation in that area a little bit better than what's already existing, which is pretty much none. And then more importantly, the steps below, kind of after the 1st of September and into early October, it deals with more of the planting of what's there. So the first step that I think we'd like to do is have kind of the four parties that are involved with that wetland on site to really go over the areas that are in greatest need and the areas on how best to address that. And I think everyone's kind of in agreement of those four parties that plain seeding by itself is probably not sufficient to deal with some of the issues that they have. So we're looking at a combination of plugs and shrubs and seeds and all those fun things to kind of put together. With planting lists that are all approved through our office in advance. The seeding list is already kind of covered in the first time, but to deal with shrubs and the other plugs that are there. And then to also deal with planting and to ensure of planting, to have someone from our office present for a lot of that planting that's there, and then to also have that success rate of 90% or greater into the next growing season, so we can still evaluate it. I mean, it's still open at that point, but just to ensure that things aren't getting hammered in the ground and just dying, and then we say, all right, they're planted, and we walk away and it's in ruins. So what's there, and then obviously the last step for us is just to make sure that the siltation measures that are necessary are in place until that soil is stabilized. So if you guys remember from our site visit we did there a couple weeks ago, kind of those main target areas are those two pretty significant patches. The one is much bigger than the other. That's still primarily exposed soil that's there, and getting something in there to start to hold that down, and then deal with the loose soil that's in that wetland area. Some of the spots are better. It'd be nice to get some plants in there that are not just soft brush too at some point to come back in. One of the things I think is important as well, and I have it in there, is I think that area where we've seen that washout from the culvert, instead of just planting seeds where it's just going to get washed out again, that some actual shrubs and some plugs just get installed in that area to ensure that that area can begin its stabilization process as well. That coupled with the clean out and the riprap shall hopefully start to alleviate the problems of that culvert on the water and sediment coming from there. So hopefully that will be helpful. Certainly this is open, this is a draft, so if any other people have any other suggested steps or concerns, we can do that, and then I can make those corrections, and then I can hunt you down in the next couple of days to get this put together.
Okay.
And get this out. I have spoken with the DPW about this, and they don't seem to have any real issues with compliance for this, so they don't get a choice. I mean, they had their choice. They had their choice. We didn't meet timeframes and we had issues, so now we're stepping through. I mean, I'll be the first to say, and I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, that if on October the 16th we're finishing up planting, we're not triggering into, berserk mode. Let's shut it down. It's reasonable progress that's there and what's there. We want to get to the end and get everything planted, but obviously weather and other factors can play a hold. So if it's a day past the deadline, or we want to get started and the work on the riprap stone gets put down 2 days afterwards after it was prepped or cleaned out, took a little longer. I think that meeting those dates is more of an incentive to get that stuff in on time, but obviously as construction goes, especially planting, if it's within reason, obviously it'll all be coordinated through here too. So we have meetings on the 3rd of September and then on the 20th, so we'll be kind of in the heart of it. So if we're behind or the town's behind on meeting that schedule, obviously we have time to meet and say, hey, you're really pushing your limit on the schedule, get to work if things are getting finished up. Or, if plants come in and something happens and plants are destroyed and we're replacing them on the 20th of October that we're planting, I don't think that's the end of the world either. But we need to keep the good momentum moving forward. And I think the timelines helped last time, so I'm trying to stick with them as much as possible.
So the as-built showed that the depths were?
Correct. So
Correct?
when they did the plan work, and I have it with me if people want to see it. So when they did the area that's here, essentially what we looked at is we had the original wetland line as it was done, and I don't think there's any dispute at this point that there were some errors in the original delineation of the wetland area that was there. That being said, it was approved, and that's the area we're dealing with. So if you look at the plan, the area that's the really light blue was the area that we approved for replication area. Yep, Millbrook is here, and then Hummock Pond. So we're looking at, it's just shy of 2,700 square feet of what was required for the original permit. We had an independent third party that was contracted by the town to go out to delineate that wetland. Yep, we reviewed, in our office, we reviewed his soil information, his plant information that was there, agreed with the new delineation in that area that he's flagged that was independent of the original wetland area is closer to 3,300 square feet. So I think our thought and my recommendation is that all earthwork and grading and those things have ceased. His soil work seemed to check out okay. Obviously, those things take a little bit of time to develop, so some of that stuff will be changing over time somewhat, but I think moving from creating area and doing earthwork to getting plants, getting things restable, getting things settled, and letting those hybrid soils develop as they should be with vegetative covering, those things is probably the next best step to ending what has not been a very good replication project. But I think trying to make some lemonade out of the lemons that were created, I think, is kind of what we're left with. So I think moving forward is a pretty good plan. I know we've been working, the Land Council holds the conservation restriction, and our office has been working with them, and I know Emily had some comments that she wanted to add as well to this. So I would certainly welcome those as one of the four parties that's really kind of tied to this project to the bitter end. So
lucky them.
Yeah. To the bitter end. Thank you, Jeff. was hoping for a few minutes of your time, just having sort of read through this letter myself. And I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I don't know if you guys discussed some of this stuff already, and I just wasn't here for it. But I guess the first comment was just kind of a take-home message that Jeff basically covered in terms of the replication area has now been shown to be sufficient so that no more earthwork is required, which we're happy about, and in general we're supportive of moving forward in this way, and the less we have to get in there and muck around with stuff anymore, the better as far as we're concerned. I guess it just, in future, if there's more replication projects before the commission that are being done as mitigation for impacts, just, I mean, for everybody, a take-home message along with some others probably from this whole experience, that I mean, the wetland boundaries and wetland flagging is always really important, but in this instance, if some of these areas were maybe misflagged or not delineated properly in the beginning, then you end up with a situation where the mitigation that is done is less than what really should have been required. I mean, they maybe didn't have to do as much replication as they should have had to do, but we don't really know here or there. But again, I think it's just another take-home message entering into these permits of wetland replication as mitigation for impacts, that it's really important to make sure that that's all clear from the start and through the process. The other thing that I just wanted to ask about and see if you guys have discussed this or not is, obviously there are some areas where new wetland was created, where it wasn't necessarily proposed, and it all balances out in terms of square footage, but I'm just wondering if that needs to somehow be memorialized as a minor mod or an amended order. I mean, I don't know if how that works, since what we now have, while it's equivalent, is different from what was originally proposed. So that's just something I'll put out there because I'm not really sure what's necessary.
I can answer that question. So that's something that we've been thinking about a lot, but I think at some point a minor mod is going to have to be brought in, or an amendment depending on how far it goes. But I think that to cover it completely will involve kind of the planting scheme and planting plan that goes with it and the species that are going to be there. The species should be relatively similar to what was originally permitted, but I think memorializing what's going in as far as the seeding list and those things for that would probably be the best direction to go. That can probably be covered through a modification because it's already work that's been permitted. It's just modifying the approval to make it more clear in those areas. I think that would cover it, but I think instead of doing multiples, to do one to cover kind of the cleanup stuff at the end would be the best way to go. So we were not every meeting for the next 3 meetings doing here's the minor mod for the new area, here's the minor mod for the shrubs and plugs, here's the minor mod because we've changed the seed list, to get all of that stuff together, compile it all at once. Now that we know that the area is meeting that, everyone seems to be satisfied that the area is generally in compliance with the intent of the permit, that the changes we have to make to that to do kind of wholesale all at once.
Okay. And then the only other thing that I just wanted to bring up with relation to the letter is steps 1 and 2. Well, number 2, I don't know if there's something missing there, riprap or other appropriate
material. Sorry.
Okay. I guess I just initially am kind of curious who will be responsible for doing steps 1 and 2, and I'm just maybe recommending that whoever is given the task is given some more details in terms of exactly what excess sediment should be removed and a little more information on the riprap installation.
Well, I think I'll just add really quickly that I don't mean to interrupt.
No.
So one of the things as we're moving through the steps, one of the things that we're trying to do to ensure that it's cleaned up is it'll probably end up being me primarily. We'll be meeting with whoever is doing the assigned work for the day out on the site to go over specifically what needs to go on, and if we need to flag or mark things, to go over it. So while they're doing the work, I'm comfortable with what's going on And I know what's going on because I have come to, I don't want to say I've come to realize, but I think one of the missteps we had with the project is there wasn't enough oversight and attention to it while it was taking place from the Natural Resources Office and from the DPW as well. And I think the easiest way to guarantee to you guys in the commission, and then also guarantee to our office that things are going correctly, is to kind of monitor and be interactive with the site when they're doing the work kind of ourselves. And I hate to do the old, you want it done right, do it yourself move, but if we want it done right, I'm going to have to make sure that someone's doing it correctly. So, because I have enough things taking up my time and schedule, I don't need to be chasing this for another 8 months.
It's sort of an evolving area.
Yeah.
And as you get the knowledge, then you figure out exactly just how to say 1 and 2 more precisely in order to.
Yeah. And a lot of it is stuff that doesn't articulate well in a letter as it does to, be on site with, I hate to pick on someone, but to be on site with someone like John Smith who may be doing the work for the DPW and saying, this here is what needs to go, and it needs to be, this is what we need to see and what's there, and to have everyone understand and have someone say, do you understand that this is what the limits are? And they say yes, and they're in the field, so there's no, well, I read the letter, and I thought you meant this, but this is really what it is. It's we're here, we're on the ground, this is what everyone means, this is what everyone understands, this is what everyone expects to take place.
So we just need to add on to be completed by September 15th in the presence of the conservation with.
No, I'll just deal with that in there.
I didn't know if it needed.
In terms of looking forward in the future, maybe the thing is that as part of these construction projects, that it's the engineers need to supervise that. When it's happening.
That was really kind of the disconnect with this project, is in the protocols that were submitted by VHB and the stuff that we approved, the conditions that they had subjected themselves to were that a project engineer was going to be present during the construction of the wetland.
And a wetland scientist.
And a wetland scientist, and
that didn't happen.
They failed to do that.
Yeah, so that's really the nub of it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's tricky when it's a government project because it all hangs on the property owner or the applicant, right? And the property owner, and so you really gut them when they want the certificate of compliance for their financing or their insurance or something. But
yeah, I think in cases going forward, this is something that when we're looking at projects that involve potential replication, to specifically condition that, regular construction meetings involve, members of the commission or commission staff to be there to go over it. Something to ensure that there will be someone there with that oversight is an important part. I mean, I hate to say it this way, taking the word of apparently someone who applies sometimes is not always the correct and prudent way, apparently. So it doesn't always work out.
Well, it's hard for them to make these decisions in the field if they don't know what they're precisely doing.
Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, well, I think that's all I had then. We just wanted to make sure that the directions were very clear to whoever has some.
You guys calling it progress?
Yeah, I would call this some progress.
We give it baby steps? Baby steps?
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't have anything else. Unless
Do we need to vote on issuing the letter with those changes?
Sure. You can. You can unanimously consent to it too.
So yeah, unless there's an objection, we'll issue this letter as amended. Okay. Thanks, Jeff, for putting that together.
And just one last question, just want to clarify, the summary that you were looking for, Mr. Glowacki, as it relates to the appeal, was that in relation to an executive session summary or an on-site summary?
After we're done, if there's not a majority of the people here, you can just hit the highlights. Or we
Sure.
can find you in the office another time. But
No, we can certainly. I just want to be sure if we wanted to do it in open session or other ones, but we can adjourn our regular meeting. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we all done?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries unanimously. We're adjourned. So, Emily, what about tomorrow? Okay, what time should I be there?
8:45.
8:45. Okay, I better write that down. Okay, thanks. I'll see you then.